Hi, and thank you for joining us for the second feedback loop for the St Vincent's Hospital co-design for their new safe haven. My name's Tina. I'm a facilitator with Roses in the Ocean, and I've been involved in facilitating a lot of these co-design processes. James?
Hello, thanks Tina. James from Roses in the Ocean as well, also one of the other facilitators. Going to support Tina through this co-design feedback loop. Let's go for it.
Great. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, and we're going to take you through today some of the feedback that we've received already about and the ideas that people have shared for this new safe haven that's being co-designed. And also we're going to go through some more specific details about what people would like to see happen with this new safe haven. Okay. So we'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are all located on sacred land. We're in different parts of Australia, which is often the case with an online process. But in particular, we'd like to pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which this new safe haven is going to be set up. So the new safe haven is going to be set up on Gadigal land, and we'd like to pay our respects to Gadigal elders, past and present, as well as to the young Gadigal people who will be the elders of the future. We'd also like to acknowledge all the people who have contributed to this co-design process who have a lived experience of suicide. That includes people who have experienced suicidal crisis, people who have survived a suicide attempt, and people who have cared for a person who has been through a suicidal crisis or have been bereaved through suicide. We'd like to really acknowledge the unique expertise that comes with lived experience, and also that many health professionals who have been involved in this process also have their own lived experience of suicide and unique expertise that comes from the support and care that they've provided for people through their work. So we are currently in the middle of a process that's involved a number of different conversations. And what you can see on this slide is a diagram that shows the different stages of this co-design. So it began with us having some fairly detailed conversation with people who have lived experience of suicide who are connected to the St Vincent's Hospital. We also then had some fairly in-depth conversations with health professionals from St Vincent's Hospital and gained their perspective. What we're sharing with you now is all of the information that we've gathered from these conversations, as well as the feedback we received from people in response to our first webinar. So that first webinar had a survey, a number of people completed that survey. And so this webinar is going to bring together all of the ideas that have been shared with us up to this point in time. Once we've finished with this webinar here, we're going to invite further feedback from people through another survey, and we're then going to take all of that information to what we call a combined session, and that will be a time when people with lived experience of suicide and health professionals who are linked to St Vincent's Hospital are all going to come together to have a conversation where all of these perspectives have the opportunity to work together and, I guess, nut out the nuts and bolts of what this new safe haven will be like. Once we finish those combined conversations with health professionals and people with lived experience, we'll then present another webinar so that we can get that wider perspective from the broader community. So I'm going to hand over to James now, who's going to take you through some of the ideas that were shared with us in that survey that was put out after the first webinar, the feedback webinar that we had earlier this year. James?
Thanks, Tina, and thank you for everyone, not this contributed, as you can see there, some great numbers, but those that are joining us live at the moment. And I think, as Tina said, there's an opportunity for people to watch this webinar at their own time after this recording, and encourage you to do that, to really hone in some of the more detailed responses. So we won't go through absolutely every quote here, but I really encourage you to when you get a chance, pause this webinar video when you're watching it and really soak in some of the awesome insight that's been collected over the last couple of sessions. And having said that, what you can see from feedback loop 1 is, in fact, from the lived experience, people involved in this process, there have been 7 responses. And with those also, the health professionals have provided 13 responses to the survey so far. So let's have a little look at those if we can, please, Tina. I'll flick through these next slides, and some, as I said, some great stuff here. We won't go through them all, but the first question and response we got is, do the slides present accurately a reflection of your experiences? And the lived experience respondents agreed the findings presented were representative of their experiences, noting the following additional comments. So as you can see there, there's lots of great comments. I will just point out a couple of them that have popped out, having read these a couple of times. Pardon me. It took an actual suicide attempt to get anyone to notice how much trauma and anguish I was going through. I kept hearing the nurses outside complaining that I was taking up the bed. Even within the system, I felt unwanted. And the ED nurses saved my life, sure, but only a physical level. There was no follow-up. So what we're going to see here is some positive and negative responses, absolutely a combination of both. But as I said, if you get a chance to pause the clip or the video webinar at some stage and really get a little bit more detail as to what these are saying. We want to spend a bit more time today going through the next steps and the sort of the difference between where we've got to. So we can pop to the next one, please, Tina. And the next slides, or this group of slides here, are asking about the reflection of needs of someone accessing the emergency department in distress. And the response agreed the findings presented were reflective of their needs. A couple of those, it would be useful to utilise the space to assist people to develop a language for their distress and skills to manage this. Focus on keeping us informed, options clearly explain and building supports for outside of the hospital. And it's important to understand that suicidal ideation does not equal, I'm going to kill myself. Beware the diagnosis. Labelling a person in crisis is unfair and incorrect. Again, some good insight and some great quotes overall. We've had a couple of conversations about this, Tina and I, and some really powerful insight and quotes that are fantastic contribution to this process. So let's keep going with the lived experience slides. We can whip to the next one, please.
Yep.
Do you agree with the draft values outlined above? And is there anything else you'd like to add? And the respondents mostly agree with the draft values outlined and suggested the following additional values: improving independence, empowering to take responsibility, a collaborative approach, validation, and connection with some of those values. And direct quotes that came from it: yes, the values sound great. Congruence of ideas between ministry forum and the local co-design session. Important the value translate into real world delivery service or service delivery, and be realistic with people. So which of these ideas are you most important, and are any other ideas you'd like to suggest? The lived experience respondents considered the following ideas to be most important. We can see a great list there, as well as the including or non-clinical model, the staff training, peer workforce, peer support and lived experience, and a full list there. And several additional ideas were suggested: beanbags, TVs, empathetic staff, and I like this one, use of humour. Moving through a couple more of these. Question is, anything else that you would like to share about your suggestions for the Safe Haven or your experience in the co-design process? One that's come out on a number of these, and again, here is a 24/7 space is what should be aimed for, this idea of where we're heading. We need to make sure we don't have much crossover with other services. And just talking about these ideas rather than having them to keep them locked inside is liberating. So some great feedback there as well, and further quotes that we can read, or I should encourage you to read when you get a chance. Let's flick through a couple of these extra slides, or these ones from the health professionals. How do the findings resonate with you? Do they actually accurately reflect your experiences as health professionals? And response agree the findings were representative of their experiences. I worry about the suggestion that staff in ED don't take presentations seriously. This is frightening. I think it captures pretty well the experiences of myself, my team, and different perspectives from other service providers. And some other quotes there, again, encourage you to read through. So how accurately these findings resonate with you, and do they accurately affect your experience as a health professional? Clinically, staff could do more suicide prevention training and hear stories of people with lived experience of suicidal crisis to destigmatise and humanise the person who is going through a suicidal crisis. Another one that stood out for me was I empathise with the feeling that clinicians can't do enough to help based on the conflicting priorities within a busy ED. And we certainly heard a lot of that through some of the feedback from the health professionals. Is there anything else you would like to share about your suggestions? And again, express support for non-clinical model and involvement of lived experience. Safe Haven could cater for groups with other specialised mental health support. One respondent acknowledged the peer workers can be vulnerable and suggested adequate supervision, debriefing and boundaries to mitigate risk. And again, some other things that came out, the importance of people feeling welcome, that they can return at any time. A couple of quotes that we can see there: we need to build confidence with our consumers that they are welcome and able to return at any time. People attending the Safe Haven may be drug affected, and I wonder how staff, mainly peers I believe, will deal with this. We certainly will talk a little bit about that later on. So is there anything else that you would like to share about your suggestions for the Safe Haven and experience? And this was the last set of slides from that feedback loop, and I'll just quickly whip through a couple of these. I worry about the suggestion that peer workers may be expected to accept or tolerate behaviour that other services wouldn't, possibly putting the staff at a significant risk of harm and the risk of burnout. I love the idea of non-clinical space designed with input from people with lived experience and health professionals. And we need to build confidence with our consumers that they're welcome and able to return at any time, which again, we repeated before. So lots of awesome input there and insight from health professionals, but also the lived experience group as well. So I want to thank you for that. As again, please stop at the clip at any stage to go through those in more detail.
Thanks for that, James. So James has just gone through with you all of the, some of the feedback that we received from people with lived experience of suicide and health professionals that are connected to St Vincent's Hospital. What we're going to do now is have a look at how all of the ideas that have been suggested during this process, how they match up with both the Ministry of Health guidelines as to what needs to happen with the setting up of the Safe Haven and the running of the Safe Haven, and also how they match up between the ideas and perspectives presented by people with lived experience and the ideas and perspectives of health professionals. So we're going to present a number of slides now. They are quite detailed, so as James said, we really encourage you to pause the webinar and to read through those slides if you are watching this at a different time to when it's recorded. But the other thing is too, all of these slides are reproduced in the survey that we're providing the link to at the end of the webinar. So you can also read through any ideas or quotes that we haven't shared with you during the webinar. You can read through those when you click on the link to go and complete the survey. So what you can see here are the specific areas that we've been seeking people's ideas about during this co-design process. So we've been having conversations to find out what values people would like to see the Safe Haven hold itself to. We haven't had a lot of conversations around location. I'll explain why in a moment, but that's fairly decided for St Vincent's Hospital. But we'll look at connection pathways to the Safe Haven, which is about how people are going to access the Safe Haven and how people will be connected to the Safe Haven. And we'll also look at outward connections and partnerships, which is about where people will go to after they've visited the Safe Haven and how is the Safe Haven going to support people to connect with other services. We've been gathering ideas about the service model, which is the types of support that people will receive in the Safe Haven, as well as looking at staffing. So looking at who will staff the Safe Haven, but also their workforce development and how they'll be supported. We look at the physical environment and the accessibility of the safe haven, as well as governance, which is about how the management of the safe haven is going to be integrated into St Vincent's Hospital's existing structures and who will be involved in managing the safe haven. So I'm going to take you through each of these separately now and present the ideas in each of these areas. In terms of the values of the safe haven, you can see on the left there that the Ministry of Health co-design has actually already identified a number of values that should be followed and promoted within the safe haven. So what we asked people who are connected to St Vincent's Hospital, we asked people with lived experience of suicide, what's particularly important to people in your local area? And you can see those values on the right there. So the values that have been identified through local co-design with people who have lived experiences: respecting identity, empowerment, flexibility and adaptability, kindness, transparency, humanizing, so breaking down the stigma, hearing, and consent. And so people with lived experience of suicide who are connected to St Vincent's Hospital would really like to see these to be the standards that, that staff and people who are supported by the safe haven hold themselves to at all times. For the other elements of the safe haven, we're going to present you people's ideas in what we call a traffic light format. So you're going to see the ideas presented in coloured text. On the left-hand side in black, you will see any regulations or any guidelines that have already been co-designed by the Ministry of Health and that the safe haven is expected to follow. Then you're going to see a column in the middle with the ideas that have been presented by people with lived experience. And you'll see a column on the right that presents ideas from people who are health professionals. And if those ideas are presented in green, it means that there is complete alignment between what the Ministry of Health requires in the safe haven, what people with lived experience would like to see in the safe haven, and what health professionals would like to see in the safe haven. Some of those ideas are going to be in orange text. And that means that we'd like to have further conversations to explore any divergence in those ideas. So, for example, ideas that are in orange might need further exploration to find out how they can be achieved within the Ministry of Health guidelines or within the constraints of the safe haven, such as funding and staffing constraints. It could also represent a difference in perspective between people with lived experience and health professionals. So they could also be ideas that are fairly new and that there needs to be further exploration of what that idea actually means in the reality of the safe haven. There will be some ideas that are presented to you in red text. If it's in red, that's to indicate that it's a suggestion or an idea that is out of scope in terms of the Ministry of Health guidelines. So something that either can't be achieved if we follow those guidelines or can't be achieved within the funding or the staffing or the practical limitations of the safe haven. So I mentioned that we haven't had a lot of conversations in the co-design about the location of the safe haven, and that's because the location has already been purchased by St Vincent's Hospital, and they've purchased the Green Park Hotel, which is, my understanding, is just across the road from St Vincent's Hospital, and this is going to be the site of the new safe haven. So we're going to start now by looking at the connection pathways to and from the safe haven. So how are people getting to the safe haven? How are they accessing it? And also, who are they being connected to after they leave the safe haven? And we've got some specific questions here that we're very interested in getting your perspectives. Especially, we really invite people who have been sent this link because they're part of the co-design process. We invite you to share the survey link and the webinar link with as many people as you can, so that we can gain their perspectives on these questions as well. So firstly, how will the service be promoted in the community, in other health services and in community organisations? What support does the district need from the ministry around communication and promotion? And what partnerships will support local connections to and from this service for guests of the Safe Haven? Also, what arrangements and protocols will be put in place to support connection to and from the emergency department if people want that to happen? So here are those 3 columns that I was talking about earlier. If you'd like to pause the webinar and read through the Ministry of Health guidelines, they're available for you there, also printed in the copies of the slides in the survey. As you can see, people with lived experience of suicide have presented many ideas, and all of them are consistent with the Ministry of Health guidelines. So some of those include providing free transport to and from the safe haven. It's important to people with lived experience that they're able to be seen quickly. And also that there be really clear pathways between St Vincent's Hospital and the Safe Haven, so that people who present in ED at St Vincent Hospital are supported to access the Safe Haven. You can see also that there's many ideas from health professionals on pathways to the Safe Haven. Just a few of those to draw to your attention. The idea that there could be an assessing clinician in the emergency department who can redirect care to the Safe Haven when someone is there voluntarily, and also resources and prompts to support emergency department staff in doing that. It's also been suggested by health professionals that people could be walked over from ED to the Safe Haven, or there could be a phone call to the Safe Haven to find out whether they have capacity to see someone at the time. There was some discussion about the open door, no wrong door policy, and health professionals have suggested that behaviour should ultimately determine whether someone is able to engage with the space, not whether they're intoxicated. So intoxication was seen as not necessarily a barrier. It's the person's behaviour and ability to engage that should be important. We also had discussion around the fact that assessments don't work particularly well with Aboriginal people who don't feel comfortable being asked a whole lot of questions. And so there was a suggestion that that people could use a yarning approach to engage with Aboriginal guests of the Safe Haven. There were a couple of suggestions that require a little bit further exploration that came out of conversations with health professionals. So firstly, the suggestion was that someone is suited for the Safe Haven if they're having suicidal thoughts, but that they're not actively or acutely suicidal. So there needs to be a little bit more conversation around how that fits in with the no wrong door approach. And also that was suggested in health professional conversations that the no wrong door approach is hypothetically a great idea, but perhaps not realistic. So the way that this no wrong door approach is going to work for the Safe Haven at St Vincent's Hospital is something that we will aim to have more conversations about, and we invite you to contribute your ideas through the survey. In terms of outward connections from the Safe Haven and where people will go after they leave the Safe Haven, and who and what services they might be connected with, you can see, again, if you'd like to pause the webinar, you can see the Ministry of Health statewide requirements in terms of outward connections. In the middle, we have ideas from people with lived experience, which you can see a number of green ideas there that are completely in alignment, including that we need to see really strong relationships between the Safe Haven and other services available in the community, and there need to be really clear pathways for accessing those. Health professionals have also contributed a whole lot of ideas that you can see on the right there, all of them in complete alignment with the Ministry of Health requirements. So some of those ideas included that in agreement with people with lived experience, that if people present to the safe haven who may be better supported elsewhere, that they're offered some space and assistance to connect with those services that might better suit their needs. It was suggested that someone who is acutely suicidal or high risk could be redirected to ED or the O'Brien Centre. But also another comment that it's important that the safe haven knows its scope and knows where to refer a guest to, and to make that process easy. So out of these conversations, we have had a couple of ideas raised by people with lived experience of suicide who we'd like to have further conversation around those ideas. So one of those is that peer workers can accompany guests to the emergency department if a clinical intervention is required. And it'd be good to talk about how those processes are going to work when there's an allocation of 2 full-time equivalent staff as peer workers to the safe haven. Also, the idea that aftercare and follow-up should be available. This is really important to people that have spoken to us who have lived experience of suicide, that people need to feel supported after they leave the service. So it'd be good to get some more ideas around what that might involve. So I'm now going to share with you some ideas that people have suggested around the service model of the safe haven, and something that we would like to see more conversation about, and we really invite your suggestions on this, is how guests, carers, family or friends will be supported. So it is likely that there will be people who will come to the safe haven with a carer, a family member or a friend, and we'd like your suggestions on what kind of support might be provided to those people, and what kind of role they might play in the support that's provided for guests. So again, on the topic of the service model, you can see on the right-hand side in black text, left-hand side in black text there, that you've got a whole lot of essential elements that have already been co-designed by the Ministry of Health. In the middle, we've got the suggestions for the service model from people who have lived experience of suicide and are connected to St Vincent's Hospital. And again, encourage you to pause the webinar and to read through all those, but just to mention a few of them, that it's seen as important that guests are provided information and explained information in a way that's easy for them to understand. It has also been suggested that there needs to be linguistically diverse translators and communicators available in the safe haven. It was really stressed that peer workers should be able and willing just to sit and listen and establish trust with people. Also that people are asked what they need rather than that being assumed or them being told what they need. And that people have the freedom to express and talk through what they deem they need to talk about, and in the way that they wish. You can see there's a number of ideas raised there by people with lived experience that we would like to get some a little bit more deeper understanding of and have some more discussion around. That's because these are great ideas that we just need to discuss how it will work within the safe haven model. That includes having sleep therapy, having art and or music therapy, the idea of having short or long-term stays available, that there should be therapy animals such as a dog or a cat, that there be continuity of care. So the idea that was shared by people with lived experience of suicide is that the same peer worker should support the guest through their time and engagement with the service each time they go to visit the service. So we'd just like to explore how that might be achieved with that 2 full-time equivalent allocation of peer workers. And also that the safe haven could arrange accommodation for homeless visitors, something that we'd just like to explore what the logistics of that might involve, and also that each peer worker have a phone number with a number that they can provide to guests of the service. So these are all conversations that will be ongoing to explore. There is one suggestion you can see there that's in red, and that was an idea that's out of scope. So the idea that there be the option for clinical support in the safe haven, if that's what people want. So the reason that we've placed that in red is because the Ministry of Health has stated that clinical services will not be provided in the safe haven. So maybe we can explore in the future exactly how those needs might be able to be met and met in a way that complies with the Ministry of Health's essential elements for the safe haven. You can see on the right there, we've got a whole lot of ideas raised by health professionals from St Vincent's Hospital about the service model. And you can see that they're all in green. So they're all in alignment with both the Ministry of Health and what people who have a lived experience of suicide have suggested. Just to draw your attention to a few of them, that guests be given time and space and privacy that they need, that the safe haven empower guests to be independent, that guests be seen in a timely manner, that culturally appropriate and accessible, that the safe space needs to be culturally appropriate and accessible for First Nations, COLD and LGBTQIA plus communities. There was some interesting ideas such as that QR codes and computers could be used to access information. Now I'm going to take you through some of the suggestions that have been made about staffing at the Safe Haven and workforce development and support for those staff. So in particular, we're interested in what's the proposed SP peer worker staffing model with an allocation of 2 full-time equivalent peer workers. What's that going to look like? How's that going to work? And also what support is required for the SP peer workforce. So in terms of staffing, you can see the Ministry of Health has one requirement, and that's that it is staffed by suicide prevention peer workers who have a lived experience of suicidal crisis. In terms of the staffing model, people with lived experience have raised a number of suggestions. You can see a lot of those are in green and in alignment. That includes that staff be dressed in casual clothes. People with lived experience also recognise the need to utilise a diverse network of peer support workers and other resources in the St Vincent's Hospital. So what was meant by that is that there are peer workers working in services elsewhere, and that those peer workers can work with SP peer workers to provide a network of supports for people. It was also raised that it's important that there are First Nations peer workers as well. There are a few ideas there that we'll need to explore further, and if you have a perspective on these, we invite you to share them in the survey. So that includes that there be adequate peer workers to enable continuity of support. And how is that going to be achieved? That's a really interesting idea it's a challenge for us to explore. There has been a suggestion that volunteers with lived experience be used in the safe haven. So that could enable some of those things that are difficult to achieve, but with just a 2 full-time equivalent workforce. So it'd be good to explore further what role volunteers might be able to play in the safe haven. Also the idea that it's really been stressed in this St Vincent's Hospital co-design process that diversity needs to be represented in the safe haven, that diverse staff need to be representative of the population of the area. So that includes staff who have experience with alcohol and other drugs, peer workers who have lived experience of homelessness, peer workers who have lived experience of sex work, different cultural backgrounds, LGBTIQA plus peer workers, and First Nations peer workers. Now, the importance of this has been made very, very clear. So it'd be good to explore how we're going to, how the safe haven could be developed in a way that everyone feels welcome and safe and supported and represented. And in particular, how that can be achieved when we have that 2 full-time equivalent peer work staffing. On the right, you can see there's again, a great range of ideas from health professionals, and there's real rich ideas here. A lot of them in green, so a lot of them in complete alignment with Ministry of Health and with people with lived experience. So some of them reflect very closely the ideas with people with lived experience. But just to point out a few comments that the health professionals would like to see staff who are passionate and who want to be there. They've said they feel it's important staff don't wear uniforms, but they might have a different coloured shirt or wear a lanyard so they can be identified as working in the safe haven. It was suggested that it could be practical to have morning staff meetings to plan the day. And also that the manager role, the manager should be a person with experience in mental health and who knows how to handle complex situations. Just a few ideas there that we'd like to have further conversations about that were raised by health professionals from St Vincent's Hospital. It was suggested that there be adequate staffing to ensure that everyone who comes in can be seen in a timely manner and that the space can remain a place of calm. So again, just within that 2 full-time equivalent staffing model, we'd like to explore how that can be achieved. Also, the use of volunteers was raised by health professionals, but they specifically mentioned the idea of using students in the safe haven to boost staffing levels, and they gave the example of nursing students could spend some time working in the safe haven. Also, familiarity with the staff was raised as being really important, so we'd like to see how that can how that's something that can be facilitated. In terms of support for the SP peer workforce, you've got on the right there in black, on the left there, sorry, in black text, all of the essential elements of workforce development and support for the SPP workforce that have been already co-designed by the Ministry of Health. You can see that everyone's ideas here are in complete alignment with each other. But just to mention a few, the people with lived experience of suicide have said that they want staff to feel able to look after their own self-care and to say when they need a break. And they also said that the staff should be able to handle client language, for example, swearing, or methods of suicide if they're mentioned by a guest. And they need to be people who visit the safe haven need to be able to verbalize what's on their mind without feeling that they're being censored in terms of their language. Health professionals mentioned that the peer workers need to know their scope and have clear guidelines, such as a flow chart, so that they know when they've got to the end of the support that they're able to provide, and they can recognise the need to escalate when that's necessary. I'm now going to take you through the ideas that have come out of our conversations around physical environment and accessibility of the safe haven. Some of the things that we really are interested in gaining your feedback on, what will the opening hours be, and what will it be the style of service? So will it be a cafe? Will it be a lounge? Will it involve meeting rooms? Do you have other ideas of what's going to happen inside the safe haven? Our understanding is that there is a heritage listed bar in the centre of the safe haven. So very interested in your ideas around how that might be used. Also, how will the service specifically address the needs of priority groups? So, for example, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people from the LGBTQI plus community, men, young people, and older people. And will information be provided in different languages? And any suggestions you have as to languages that it's really important to provide information in for the community near St Vincent's Hospital? We've had lots of ideas proposed as to the physical environment and the accessibility of the safe haven. Do invite you to pause the webinar and to read through all of these and to share with us any other suggestions that you have. So you can see the Ministry of Health requirements on the left there, and the main requirements there are about it being safe and representative as a space. In terms of lived experience perspectives on the physical environment, a lot of ideas that are in complete alignment there. Some of those include that the place be warm, homely, inviting, and non-clinical. It has been suggested that there should be a prayer room, that there needs to be a copy of religious texts available in the safe haven. It was raised that there should be no mental health or motivational or inspirational posters on the wall, that is not something that is always helpful for a person who's experiencing suicidal crisis. And that they want it to have a very different feel to what a space that provides mental health services often has as its feel and its look. Also that there should be music available to listen to and access to computers, phones, and reliable hi-fi. Tea, coffee, and snacks should be available. And also that staff should wear name tags so that they can easily be differentiated from guests. Few ideas that we need to have further conversations about are there in orange, including providing a small gym or exercise area with punching bags and yoga mats, that there be musical instruments that people can play, including guitar and drums and piano, and it'll be good to talk about where they may be located and how they may be utilized by guests without, I guess, interfering with what some other guests might need at the time. There should be an on-site masseuse or massage chairs, and it's been suggested that a minimum of 3 massage chairs be provided. Also, the ability to access a kitchen and cook your own food as a therapeutic activity. So we'd just like to get some more ideas around what that might involve. We've also had some comments from health professionals on the food being available in the safe haven. And finally, we'd like to talk with people more about opening hours. So people with lived experience of suicide would really ideally like to see this space open 24/7. We know with the current staffing allocation model that could be challenging. So it'd be good to have some conversations around what can be achieved within that staffing model. You can see on the right-hand side here that health professionals have also raised a whole range of ideas for the physical environment and accessibility of the safe haven. Some of those ideas included, and you can see that they're mostly in green, so in complete alignment, that local First Nations artwork should be visible throughout, and that the safe pink triangle for LGBTQI plus people should be readily visible in the space, as well as other visual cues such as flags and artworks, and pronouns as well. That it's really important that people feel welcome and supported and safe in the safe space. It was suggested that there be IT hubs, and also that there were some comments around that bar in the center of the safe haven. Health professionals felt that it could actually be a central point for the safe haven where people can sit around it on stools and talk with one another. There was a preference that there should be a cafe type look and feel, and other ideas included having a walk into a communal space that people can walk into, with people sitting around having a yarn and doing art and in other ways occupied. It was suggested that support should be available after 11 p.m. Health professionals commented that suicidal ideation is more likely at night when people get lonely. But they agreed with people who have lived experience that the blue sky dreaming, the ideal would be to have it open 24/7. As I mentioned before, there were some comments in our conversations with health professionals about the availability of food, and there was some concern that providing free food can lead to people who aren't necessarily attending the safe pace, can lead to people attending the safe space for reasons that it wasn't designed for. So in other words, concerns that people might start to access the safe haven in order to get food rather than to access support during a suicidal crisis. So it'll be interesting to have further conversations with both people who have a lived experience perspective and health professionals about what role food might play in the safe haven. So we're now going to look at the final issue that we collected information on. And that was asking people for their ideas about governance in the safe haven. We really encourage you in the survey to let us know your ideas about governance, and some of the questions that we have. How will management of the service be reflected in clinical and operational governance structures of the district? What are the key risks in establishing the service and how will they be managed? And what arrangements and protocols will be put in place to support referrals to and from the emergency department? Also, how will people have the opportunity to provide feedback on the service, and how will outcome data be collected and reported? So you can see this is a topic we're particularly interested in gaining the perspectives of people who have lived experience of suicide. It's something that needs to be explored in greater depth. We've got the Ministry of Health requirements for governance on the left-hand side there in black, which you can pause the webinar and read. Also, we have, and the idea that was presented by people with lived experience of suicide is that documents and notes should be taken for continuity and care. The idea was that those notes will be necessary when a guest returns to the service. So we'd just like to explore exactly what sorts of notes people with lived experience would like to see taken when a guest seeks support through the safe haven. There has been, I guess, a more in-depth contribution from health professionals on this topic. You can see that they're mostly in green, so mostly in alignment with the Ministry of Health requirements for governance. Just a few of those ideas that are in alignment include to manage risks of people presenting for other reasons by identifying immediate needs when people arrive at the service, that there be a flow chart or escalation procedure for when staff feel that someone isn't safe, that the safe space needs to acknowledge the risk of people not talking about how they're feeling, that people may not speak if they fear being scheduled. And also that they highlighted the role of the manager in knowing how to handle complex situations to ensure that a person is going to get the support that they need. One idea that was raised in the health professional conversations about governance that we'd like to explore in a little more detail and get your perspective on was the idea that there should be connection to a clinician to do an assessment of whether a person may need to be admitted to the hospital. The reason that we'd like to explore that further is because the Ministry of Health have made it clear that people shouldn't be required to do an assessment in order to access support through the safe haven, and also that clinical services will not be delivered within the safe haven. So we'd like to explore with people how they can achieve what they're looking to achieve in this area of governance in a way that also complies with the Ministry of Health essential elements of the safe haven. So I'm going to hand over to James now, but thank you for allowing us the time to share with you some of the perspectives and suggestions that have been put forward during our conversation so far.
Well done, Tina, and thank you. And repeat what you said, a significant amount of insight and content, lots of green, a minimal amount of amber, and only the one red, which doesn't align with the Ministry of Health as you've outlined. So thank you for that. This is the last slide, and a quick conversation for us around where to from here. So we are in this session, as it says, Feedback Loop 2. And that will be available to people shortly, if not this afternoon, next day or so, with the survey closing on the 22nd of June 2001. So please encourage you to share that link to other people that you might think can add some value to this conversation and help kind of tease out and answer some further questions and ideas as Tina shared. And then on the 22nd of June, we'll have a combined session. So this is bringing together the health professionals and the lived experience of suicide individuals to really, to get to know each other a little bit, but to understand about what's important to each of those participants from those groups, and really reach further agreement between the lived experience group and the health professionals around some of the key elements of the local safe space by working through some scenarios. And also, I love those sessions because it's also about gaining some agreement on what are the non-negotiables of the local safe space and really prioritise those. So that'll be on the 22nd of June via the Zoom session as well. So again, encourage you, if that's not in your diary, please do so for a fairly lengthy session, but absolutely important session to get that, ultimately get to that feedback loop number 3, as you can see there, on the 29th of June at 3 o'clock. And again, following that feedback loop survey or webinar from that combined session, there'll be a survey that will close a week or so after that on the 6th of July. For more information, check out that link, please. But otherwise, I want to thank you for your time again today. Tina?
Thank you. So we'll just give you, we're aware that it's been a while. There's been a lot of information that we've taken you through, but if you have any questions, we just want to give you that opportunity to ask those questions. So is the survey based on our feedback from today? So the feedback from the survey that you complete, I'm not sure which feedback loop that was a question about, but there's a link to a survey at the end of this webinar. The purpose of that survey is to get your input on all of the different issues that we've gone through today, all of those topics, anything that's important to you, any new suggestions that you have. So in particular, we're interested in whether what we've captured so far really reflects your experience and what you would like to see in the safe haven, as well as you notice that there are a number of questions through the webinar, and we invite your ideas on that as well. The purpose of us collecting this information is, yes, we will gather all the responses to the survey, and then we'll be presenting those to people at the beginning of that third combined session. So it means that the people who are present in the room during that final combined session are aware of the broader perspectives that, that need to be represented in that conversation. Yeah. So I'll just give you a moment to, if there's any other questions. Please do share the link for this webinar and for the survey. We would like to see as many people as possible who are connected to St Vincent's Hospital contribute their ideas. That includes people with lived experience of suicide and people who are health professionals at St Vincent's Hospital. Also, any health professionals that you're aware of in the local area for other services, such as other support services. Very, very interested in hearing their ideas as well. Cool. Okay. So James, I might bring the webinar to a close, but if you do have some questions, please get in touch with Roses in the Ocean, and we'd be more than happy to answer those for you, and really look forward to getting your feedback and heading into that combined session that's coming up next.
Well done. Thanks everyone for joining.